Imagine for a second that you are holding a piece of paper.
Okay.
And it's this old, maybe slightly frayed document, something passed down from your grandparents or great-grandparents.
Right, the kind of paper that feels like it's going to fall apart if you breathe on it too hard.
Exactly. And on this piece of paper, it says that you own a piece of land, a very valuable, tangible, physical piece of earth.
So you've got an asset.
You do.
Yeah.
So you take this piece of paper and you walk into a shiny, modern bank. You sit down with a loan officer and you say, I want to start a business. I want to build something. And here is my collateral.
Makes sense.
Right. And you slide that old, frayed piece of paper across the desk. But the loan officer looks at it, kind of squints at it, looks back at you, and says, I can't accept this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They tell you the boundaries on the paper are vague, like they can't verify if your uncle actually sold his share 20 years ago, or if, someone else entirely is currently claiming the exact same plot of land.
Because the paper itself doesn't prove anything to the modern financial system.
Exactly. To the bank, your very real physical land is functionally invisible. So today we are doing a deep dive into a blueprint designed to fix this exact problem of invisible wealth.
And it's a massive problem.
It really is. It's a plan that starts with a huge satellite mapping project in India, and it ends with the potential to unlock a staggering $50 trillion across the global south.
Oh.
So let's dive in.
Yeah, the economist Hernando de Soto actually coined a brilliant term for the scenario you just described. He calls it dead capital.
Dead capital. That's a very evocative phrase.
It is, right. It perfectly describes wealth that exists in the physical world. I mean, you can stand on it, you can farm it, but it is completely trapped in this bureaucratic limbo.
You can't actually do anything financial with it.
Exactly. Because it cannot be leveraged, it can't be easily sold, and it certainly cannot be used to generate new wealth or get a loan. The sources we are unpacking today, which are drawn from a really detailed analytical series on what they call completing the digital stool, argue that this dead capital is actually the primary bottleneck holding back the entire developing world.
And the author makes the case that India has already built, two legs of a massive digital infrastructure to solve part of this problem.
Right, the first two legs of that stool.
Yeah. But to truly eradicate unemployment and unlock all that trapped value, they really need to forge a third leg. So our mission today for this deep dive is to examine this blueprint.
It's a really fascinating roadmap.
It is. We are going to look at how combining digital identity, instant payments, and a, frankly, very radical approach to land ownership could take millions of completely landless individuals and just transform them into funded entrepreneurs.
And it's probably worth noting up front for everyone listening, the author's proposing some pretty intense things here, like a mandatory wealth cap on land.
Yeah, we definitely need to flag that, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, whether you see a wealth cap as a necessary systemic reform or just a massive state overreach, the sheer mechanics of trying to execute that digitally are fascinating.
Oh, absolutely.
And just as a quick disclaimer, our goal today isn't to endorse these policies, right? We're just here to understand the economic theories and the underlying technology that the sources are proposing.
Exactly. We are basically dissecting the engine of a proposed macroeconomic upgrade. But to understand why this third leg, the land digitization, is so critical, we really first have to look at the stability of the two legs India already has in place.
Right. What the author refers to as digital public infrastructure, or DPI.
Yeah. And the first leg of that DPI is Aadhaar.
Which is, simply put, the world's largest biometric digital identity system. I mean, we are talking about over 1 billion people.
It's staggering scale.
It really is. But the importance isn't just the size, right? It's the mechanism of trust. Because before Aadhaar, if you lived in a rural village and wanted to open a bank account, the bank required utility bills or formal birth certificates.
Which is paperwork that hundreds of millions of people simply didn't possess.
Exactly. They were completely locked out. Aadhaar solved that identity bottleneck by tethering a person's identity directly to their biometrics.
Irises and fingerprints.
Yeah. You prove you are who you say you are, unequivocally. There's no paperwork to forge or lose.
And that biometric deduplication is the absolute key there.
Wait, unpack that a bit. What do you mean by deduplication in this context?
Well, it means you cannot have ghost identities draining the system. One person can't register 5 times to get 5 different sets of government benefits. The biometrics guarantee one person, one identity.
Oh, I see. So it cleans up the entire foundational database of the country.
Exactly. And once you have that absolute rock-solid foundation of identity, you can build the second leg, which is the unified payments interface, or UPI.
Right, so if Aadhaar is the identity layer, UPI is the transaction layer.
Basically, yes. It is an interoperable network that allows anyone with a mobile phone and a bank account to transfer money in real time.
And I think the interoperability part is what people outside of India often miss about UPI. Like, if you're listening to this in the US, if I have Venmo, I can only send money to someone else who also has Venmo, right?
Right, it's a closed garden.
Yeah, or if I use Zelle, I have to use Zelle. But UPI is a protocol that sits underneath all the banks and all the app.
It's the plumbing itself.
Exactly. I can use Google Pay, you can use PhonePe, someone else can use a local bank app, and the money moves instantly across all of them, essentially for free.
And the sources point out that this combination, having the ID and the frictionless payments, has completely slashed transaction costs across the board.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about saving the economy tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah, the measurable GDP growth correlated with just this infrastructure alone is immense. But, and this is where the text really digs in, the author's entire thesis hinges on the fact that a two-legged stool is inherently unstable.
It's going to fall over.
Right. You have identity and you have payments. But if you want to support the full weight of a modern economy, specifically if you're aiming for long-term job creation and broad-based entrepreneurship, you are missing the foundation of physical wealth.
You need collateral.
You absolutely need collateral.
Which brings us to the missing third leg we mentioned, comprehensive land digitization.
Yes.
The idea is to have secure, transparent, and marketable property rights integrated directly into this existing digital stack. Now, it's not like the government hasn't been trying to fix this already.
Right, they have programs in place.
Yeah, the text mentions something called the Digital India Land Records Modernization Program. And to be honest, the stats the author provides actually sound pretty impressive at first glance.
They do, yeah.
They claim nearly 95% of rural land records have been computerized, and over 68% of cadastral maps, which are those detailed property boundary maps, are digitized. But the challenge there is the definition of the word computerized.
Right. Because scanning a bad document doesn't make it a good document.
Exactly. Taking an inaccurate century-old paper record and just typing it into a database doesn't make it accurate. It just makes it digital.
Yeah.
A computerized record might still literally define a boundary as running, from the old banyan tree to the riverbank.
Which is terrifying for a bank. What happens when the tree falls down or the river shifts course after a monsoon?
The record becomes completely useless.
So it's less like moving from a dusty Rolodex to a live dynamic Google Doc and more like trying to move from a casual handshake agreement directly to a blockchain smart contract.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, because if the underlying data is subjective and messy, the smart contract fails. The computer doesn't know what a banyan tree is.
No, it doesn't. And that's why the author proposes fixing this fundamental flaw with something called Bhu-Aadhaar, or the unique land parcel identification number.
Okay, so a unique ID for land, just like Aadhaar, is a unique ID for people.
Exactly. The mechanism here is a 14-digit alphanumeric code assigned to every single land parcel in the entire country.
But how do they get that code? Because it can't just be randomly generated, right?
Right. It's not randomly generated by a server. It is mathematically derived from the exact latitude and longitude coordinates of the land itself.
Oh, wow. So you are essentially hard-coding the physical Earth into a digital database.
Yes, locking it to the literal geometry of the planet.
But to get those exact coordinates, I mean, you can't just rely on someone walking the perimeter of a farm with a measuring tape, right?
Definitely not.
The author talks about a massive technological leap involving satellites and drones to make this happen. How does this practically work on the ground?
Well, it requires a really sophisticated, multi-layered approach. First, you have the high-resolution satellite imagery layer.
Right.
The text specifically mentions leveraging ISRO, which is India's space agency, and using their Cartosat satellites.
Yeah.
These give you a macro-level grid of the entire nation.
Okay, so the satellites give you the big picture. But satellites have limitations, right?
Very much so. They can't see through dense forest canopies, for example. And their resolution, while great, might not be enough to capture a boundary dispute over, say, a 2-foot retaining wall between two neighbors.
Which is where the drones come in.
Exactly. The drones fly at very low altitudes, conducting these incredibly detailed topographic surveys using photogrammetry and LiDAR technology.
So they're mapping it in 3D, basically.
Yeah, they captured the exact physical boundaries down to the centimeter. Then all of the spatial data from the satellites and the drones is fed into geographic information systems.
Okay.
And then the final layer, according to the sources, is locking these verified records onto a distributed ledger or a blockchain.
And the immutability aspect of that is crucial.
It's the whole point.
Because once that boundary is verified by the satellite, ground-truthed by the drone, and locked securely on the ledger, the banking API doesn't even need a human loan officer to approve the collateral anymore.
Nope. The land itself is effectively acting as its own guarantor.
Right, because the math proves it exists, and the cryptographic ledger proves that you own it. You completely eliminate that lingering doubt from the loan officer's mind.
Conceptually, it is bulletproof.
Yeah.
You have this real-time, geo-referenced national land database. Every plot has its unique 14-digit Bhu-Aadhaar ID, which is intrinsically linked to its mutation history.
Wait, mutation history?
Oh, that just means a record of every single time the land has changed hands or been modified legally.
Got it.
And most importantly, that land ID is linked directly to the Aadhaar-verified biometric identity of the owner.
So the person and the land are digitally fused together in the system.
Exactly.
I mean, if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, that sounds great for a tech demo, but deploying actual fleets of drones to map every single inch of a subcontinent sounds impossible, you are exactly where I was when I first started reading this.
It sounds like a logistical mountain to climb.
It sounds like science fiction. But the author is very quick to point to global precedents to prove this can actually be done. Let's look at what happens when a country actually gets this right, starting with Estonia.
Right. Now, obviously, Estonia operates on a completely different scale than India.
Yeah, they have, what, barely over 1 million people.
Right. Very tiny population. But their underlying architecture, which is known as the X Road, is what makes their digital land register so incredibly successful.
Okay.
Anyone in Estonia can go online and instantly access ownership details for any plot, check for existing mortgages, and see any legal restrictions on a piece of property.
It's totally transparent. And the author mentions that Estonia uses electronic conveyancing. What does that actually look like for an everyday citizen trying to buy a house?
Basically, it means the legal transfer of property happens entirely digitally.
No paperwork.
Zero. In a traditional system, you have to hire lawyers, title searchers, notaries, and the paperwork just bounces between municipal offices for months.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
But in Estonia, because the system is perfectly interoperable, the bank, the buyer, the seller, and the government are all viewing the exact same immutable ledger simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
So when the funds clear the digital bank account, the title updates instantly on the registry. The text notes that this slashed processing times from months down to literally mere days. It provides absolute legal certainty.
Because if the computer says you own it, you own it. There is
Yeah.
no lingering doubt, no secondary claims hiding in a filing cabinet somewhere.
Exactly.
But again, applying a system built for a small, highly developed Baltic nation to India, which is a nation of 1.4 billion people with centuries of, frankly, tangled agrarian history, that is a massive leap.
It's a fair criticism.
And the author anticipates this skepticism, which is why they bring up Rwanda as a proof of concept for doing this in the developing world.
Yeah, Rwanda is the perfect counterweight to the Estonia example. The text highlights that between 2008 and 2012, Rwanda managed to map and register over 10.4 million land parcels.
I mean, the author points to Rwanda as a success story, which blew my mind because they managed to map over 10 million parcels in just 4 years. But I don't understand how they did it for only $5 to $7 a parcel.
It's incredibly cheap.
Right, because traditional land surveying costs thousands of dollars. You need specialists. Did the text explain the mechanics of how they got the costs so low?
It did, and it's brilliant. The brilliance of the Rwandan model was recognizing that they couldn't afford traditional, highly educated surveyors carrying around expensive theodolites for every single tiny plot of land.
It would have bankrupted the project.
Exactly. So they used a participatory community mapping approach.
What would that mean?
They trained local para-surveyors, everyday people from the area, and they would literally print out high-resolution satellite maps on these massive sheets of vinyl.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, they'd lay them out in the village square and have the community leaders and all the neighbors physically stand there, point out, and agree upon the boundaries right there on the printed map.
That's fascinating. So they basically crowdsourced the dispute resolution before they ever digitized the record.
They did. Once the community verbally agreed, the boundaries were marked on the map, then digitized, and formal titles were issued.
Wow.
And the socioeconomic benefits of doing it this way were profound. When boundaries are clear and agreed upon publicly, neighbors stop fighting over where the fence goes. It drastically reduced local conflicts.
Which frees up so much mental and financial energy.
But the most transformative data point the text highlights about Rwanda is the massive boost in women's land ownership.
Oh, really? Because the formalization process required both spouses to be listed on the title.
That was a huge part of it, yes. The new laws demanded equal rights, and the communal mapping process actually enforced it on the ground. The text states that over 60% of the land titles in Rwanda now include women.
That is a staggering shift in power.
It is. It boosted their tenure security, which directly improved their access to credit and their agricultural productivity, because they actually owned the land they were working.
Okay, so we have Estonia proving the absolute certainty and speed of a digital ledger, and Rwanda proving that you can map millions of parcels rapidly and cheaply using community consensus, even in a post-conflict developing context.
Right.
The author's argument, then, is that India is uniquely positioned to take the best of both of those models, because neither Estonia nor Rwanda had the massive pre-existing scale of Aadhaar and UPI when they started.
The compounding effect there is the key. India doesn't just get a digital land registry. They get a registry that instantly integrates with the biometric identity of 1 billion people and the real-time financial flows of an entire subcontinent.
It's the full stool.
Exactly.
I see the technological synergy, I really do. But this is where I have to bring some deep skepticism to the author's framework.
Go for it.
Estonia is tiny, and Rwanda achieved its mapping in the wake of a horrific genocide that fundamentally reset its societal structures.
That's a very valid point.
Right. Can a model like this truly scale across India without crumbling under the weight of local disputes, the human friction, the entrenched power dynamics? It just seems insurmountable to me.
The scale is a monumental hurdle, I completely agree. And it's driven by a deeply entrenched human problem. Because to map the land, you have to confront the dark reality of who actually owns it right now.
And the statistics the author provides on that are stark.
They are grim. Let's get into those numbers.
Yeah, the text points out that approximately 46% of rural Indian households own absolutely no land.
Nothing.
Almost half the population.
And on the other end of the spectrum, the top 10% of households control around 44% of the total land area.
That is an extreme bottleneck of wealth. A tiny fraction holds almost half the land, and nearly half the population holds nothing at all.
And the author frames this landlessness as one of the absolute strongest predictors of persistent poverty.
Right, because if a family has no land, they have no base.
Exactly. They cannot access formal credit because they have nothing to pledge as collateral.
They're completely cut off.
Cut off from building intergenerational wealth, meaning they are essentially locked out of the capitalist engine entirely.
But the concept of dead capital goes beyond just the landless, right? Even the people who do own land in India are often trapped.
Yes, because their titles are unclear, bringing us back to that frayed piece of paper from the beginning.
Right.
The text mentions that unclear land titles create these massive cascading economic bottlenecks. For instance, thousands upon thousands of land-related court cases are currently clogging up the Indian judicial system.
Just people fighting over who owns what based on terrible paper records.
Yes, and the opportunity cost there is devastating. Money and time that could be spent building businesses or improving crop yields is instead literally burned in legal fees and court delays.
And sometimes those cases span multiple generations.
Often they do. It severely stunts agricultural investment. I mean, think about it. If you aren't absolutely certain that a distant relative won't show up with a competing paper claim next year, you aren't going to invest in an expensive new drip irrigation system.
Of course not. Why would you?
The incentives for productivity are completely destroyed.
And this all trickles down to create what the author identifies as the core of India's jobs crisis, a massive informal sector.
Yes.
The sources state that the informal sector employs the vast majority of the workforce. These are unregistered businesses operating in regulatory gray zones without access to formal banking and suffering from incredibly low productivity.
The author is making a really profound macroeconomic argument here. They are framing poverty not just as a lack of income, but almost entirely as a lack of collateral.
Wow. Wait, so is the core argument that the Indian jobs crisis isn't actually a lack of jobs per se, but a lack of capital access for everyday people to just create their own jobs?
That is the exact thesis. You
No.
cannot solve unemployment from the top down by simply building massive mega factories or creating temporary government work programs. You have to unlock the capital at the bottom.
That makes a lot of sense.
But, and this is the big but, this exposes the flaw in simply deploying technology. Fixing the digital records and creating a perfect Bhu-Aadhaar system doesn't solve the structural problem if 46% of the rural population has no land to record in the first place.
Because if you just digitize extreme inequality, you just have very efficient high-tech
Oh,
inequality.
sorry. That was the author's realization, too.
Yeah.
And that leads directly into their most radical and politically explosive proposal.
Here we go.
To truly complete the digital school and ignite the economy, they argue you cannot just map the land. You have to fundamentally change who owns it.
Right. This is where the blueprint moves from a tech policy discussion to a massive social engineering project.
That really does.
The author calls this universal minimum land ownership. So let's break down how this framework actually operates.
Okay, so the proposal is to guarantee every single Indian family a viable minimum plot of land.
Every single family.
Yes, and they specified that the size of this plot would be adjusted based on regional productivity.
Okay, meaning what?
Well, a plot in the highly fertile Ganges Basin might be smaller than a plot in the arid regions of Rajasthan. The goal is ensuring equitable economic potential, rather than just giving everyone the exact same equal square footage.
Okay, I understand the logic, but guaranteeing land for hundreds of millions of landless people, the immediate glaring question is, where does all this land come from? India is an incredibly crowded place.
It is. The text outlines three main sources for this land. The first two are relatively straightforward: government land banks, where the state already holds significant acreage, and the reclamation of unused public land or wasteland to make it productive.
But those two alone aren't enough to satisfy the demand. I think there's no way.
What's the third source?
The third is where the political friction spikes off the charts. The author proposes implementing an upper ceiling on holdings,
A hard wealth cap on land.
a hard legal cap on how much land one individual or family can legally own, again adjusted for productivity and location. Any surplus land above that ceiling would be legally acquired by the state and redistributed to the landless. I mean, you're talking about seizing wealth from the most powerful people in rural India, taking land from the top 10% who currently own 44% of it, and funneling that excess directly to the bottom 46%.
That's the plan. But the author attempts to differentiate this from historical, messy redistributions by arguing that the technology changes the nature of the process.
Not so.
In their vision, every redistributed plot is immediately assigned a Bhu-Aadhaar. The very moment a landless family receives their minimum plot, that ownership is instantly verified, geotagged by satellite, and locked securely into the digital ledger.
Okay, so it's essentially a modern digital version of the 1862 Homestead Act in the U.S. The government gives you a piece of the earth to build your future on, but instead of covered wagons and wooden stakes driven into the ground, it's executed via ISR satellites and immutable blockchain records.
That's a great analogy. The historical parallel holds up, particularly in the intent to create a nation of active asset owners. And the author defends this policy by insisting it is not old-style disruptive redistribution. Because it is data-driven, transparent, and digitally verified, they claim it is specifically designed to minimize disputes. The logic is that if everyone can see the immutable data, the chaos usually associated with land reform is completely neutralized.
Yeah, I have to push back incredibly hard on that assumption.
I figured you would.
I mean, an app does not stop a lawsuit. Even with perfect, pristine satellite data, taking land from the wealthy elite is historically a recipe for intense, sometimes violent political conflict.
Absolutely.
The wealthy have access to the best lawyers. They can tie up the definition of surplus or productivity in courts for decades. Does the author explain how a digital title prevents the very real human resistance to having assets seized?
To the author's credit, the text does acknowledge these massive implementation hurdles. They are not entirely blind to the politics here.
Okay, good.
They clearly state that building political consensus on those wealth ceilings is a monumental task. Furthermore, they highlight the challenge of ensuring fair valuation for the land that is capped and redistributed.
Right, because how do they propose valuing it? If the government sets the price too low, it's basically confiscation. But if they set it at market rate, the state bankrupts itself trying to buy all the surpluses.
It's a huge problem. The text suggests relying on independent valuation tribunals and utilizing the massive amounts of data generated by the new digital registries to find true market clearing prices. But they admit it remains a precarious balancing act.
I would imagine so.
They also explicitly mention the need to protect genuine small farmers and ensure women's land rights aren't trampled during the chaotic transition period.
And what about the grievance mechanisms? Because mistakes will inevitably happen. A drone miscalculates a boundary, or a clerical error accidentally swaps two parcels?
Establishing robust grievance mechanisms is listed as a critical dependency in the texts. Building public trust that these new digital titles are truly secure and cannot be easily manipulated by powerful local interests is paramount.
It has to be airtight.
But the author's ultimate defense is not that the process will be easy or frictionless. Their defense is that the economic explosion following this redistribution will be so vast and so transformative that it will ultimately justify the friction.
Ah.
You are replacing a stagnant feudal system with a highly dynamic engine of decentralized wealth creation.
Okay, let's walk through that economic explosion then. Because if I'm listening to this and thinking, okay, giving someone a digital title on an app doesn't magically put money in their pocket today, we really need to look at what physically happens the day after a poor family gets this Bhu-Aadhaar.
Let's do it.
Let's trace the user journey of a newly landed citizen moving from having a piece of land to getting instant credit.
All right, let's imagine a family that has been landless for generations. They've been surviving on informal, cash-in-hand, daily wage labor.
No safety net at all.
Right. Suddenly, under this new policy, they hold a Bhu-Aadhaar title to a small, viable plot. Because that land is digitally verified and undisputed, its risk profile drops to near zero for a lender.
Okay.
It instantly becomes high-quality automatic collateral.
Because it's no longer a frayed piece of paper. It's a cryptographic asset recognized by the central banking API.
Exactly. Now, this is where the integration with the first two legs of the digital stool really happens. The author brings up something called the JAM Trinity.
Which stands for Jandhan, Aadhaar, and mobile.
Right. The Jandhan Yojana was this massive government push to get every single Indian a basic, no-frills bank account.
Okay.
So Jandhan is the bank account. Aadhaar provides their biometric identity. And mobile provides their access point to the internet and UPI. When you add the new land collateral to this JAM trinity, the friction in the financial system just evaporates.
Let's use a micro example so I can visualize this. Let's say I want to start a small tailoring business, right? I need a loan for a sewing machine and some fabric.
Perfect example.
In the old system, I have no collateral, I have no credit score, and I might not even have formal identity paperwork. So I have to go to a local moneylender charging what? Exorbitant interest rates, which basically guarantees I stay poor forever.
Exactly. You were trapped.
So how does this new system change that specific scenario?
Under the author's blueprint, you open a simple government-backed app on your phone.
Okay.
The banking system already knows exactly who you are via your Aadhaar biometric login. It already knows what land you own, its exact geographic coordinates, and its algorithmic market value via your Bhu-Aadhaar linkage.
So it has all my data instantly.
Right. Therefore, the bank's algorithm can pre-approve a microloan instantly.
That is wild. It's frictionless financing. I don't have to walk into a branch, I don't have to grovel to a loan officer, and I definitely don't need a stack of notarized paperwork. The API just pings the ledger, verifies the asset, and the funds drop right into my Jandhan account.
Yes, the funding flows digitally with minimal bureaucracy.
That's a game changer.
But getting the loan is only step one. The text correctly identifies that most small businesses in the informal sector fail to formalize because compliance and accounting are total nightmares.
Right. A street vendor selling chai doesn't have the margins to hire an accountant to do their taxes.
Exactly. So how does the blueprint solve the compliance barrier?
Good question.
This is where UPI acts as the automated bookkeeping layer. The author describes a mechanism where, if this new entrepreneur conducts 100% of their business transactions digitally via UPI.
Like buying supplies from wholesalers and selling goods to customers.
Right. If they do all that on UPI, the payment network itself generates a real-time, perfectly auditable record of their cash flow.
Wait, let me make sure I grasp the mechanics of this. If I sell chai and 50 people scan my QR code today to pay me, the government API is instantly filtering those microtransactions into an automated profit and loss statement for me.
That is the vision, yes.
Yeah.
You don't need to maintain complicated ledgers or hire an accountant. The payments network is your ledger.
That's incredible.
The compliance barrier simply vanishes. But the author goes one step further to ensure these newly formalized businesses actually survive their infancy. They propose a sweeping 10-year tax holiday.
A decade of tax breaks. That is a massive incentive. What are the specifics outlined in the text for that?
The proposal includes implementing a minimal sales tax, perhaps around 5%, and zero corporate income tax for businesses operating below a certain turnover threshold for their first 10 years.
Wow, the psychological shift there is immense. The government is essentially saying, we gave you the land, we made the loan frictionless, the app does your accounting for you. Now, just keep the profits you make for the next decade to scale your business. Just stay inside the formal digital system.
Right. It powerfully incentivizes the informal sector to step into the light, willingly. It removes the fear of regulatory harassment and crushing early taxation, which honestly are the primary reasons businesses stay informal to begin with.
What strikes me is how elegantly these policies all stack together. You give them the land for collateral, the app facilitates the loan, UPI handles the bookkeeping, and the tax holiday ensures survival. It is essentially a business in a box distributed to a billion people.
Business in a box. I like that.
Yeah.
And the author draws a very sharp contrast between this bottom-up, decentralized approach and traditional top-down job creation models.
Right, because traditionally, when a government looks at a 5% unemployment rate, which is usually much higher among the youth, the instinct is to announce a massive mega factory or a huge infrastructure project to create thousands of jobs at once.
Exactly. But the author argues that millions of decentralized micro-businesses spread across rural areas and Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities are a far superior, much more resilient solution.
Why does the author believe micro-entrepreneurship is fundamentally better than industrialization for India's specific demographic challenge?
Because it creates economic gravity where people already live.
Oh, that's an interesting phrase, economic gravity.
Yeah, it stems the immense migration pressure on massive, already overburdened metropolitan areas like Mumbai or Delhi. When people have skin in the game, when they're actual asset owners in their own villages, they invest locally.
Right. A shopkeeper expands her store, a mechanic opens a repair workshop right there in town.
Exactly. The wealth circulates locally rather than being extracted by a distant corporation. It turns India's massive population from a demographic burden into a distributed entrepreneurship dividend.
It's basically democratizing capitalism at scale by fixing the underlying plumbing of the economy.
It is.
And if this business-in-a-box model works for a billion people in India, it stands to reason it could work for billions more, facing the exact same structural bottlenecks around the world. Which brings us to the final, sweeping geopolitical argument of the text, taking this digital stool global.
Yeah, this is where the author's vision expands dramatically from domestic policy to international geopolitics. They propose that India should package and export this complete digital stool model to the entire global south.
So we are talking about nations across Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and small island developing states.
Yes.
Countries that suffer from the exact same interlocking problems: weak identity systems, cash-heavy informal economies, and massive amounts of unmapped, insecure land ownership.
The author draws a very direct, provocative comparison to China's geopolitical strategy over the last 2 decades. China has built immense global influence by exporting physical infrastructure.
Right, the Belt and Road Initiative, high-speed rail networks, massive ports, highways across the global south.
Exactly. But the author argues that India's digital export strategy would be far superior.
How so?
Well, exporting the digital Stool-Aadhaar style identity frameworks, UPI-style open payment protocols, the satellite land mapping tech, and all the accompanying policy templates, it's cheaper to deploy, significantly faster to implement, vastly more transparent, and critically, it is far less debt-intensive for the receiving countries.
That's a really crucial distinction. It's not saddling a developing African nation with a multi-billion-dollar high-interest loan to build a port that they might ultimately have to hand over to China if they default.
Right. It avoids that debt trap entirely.
It's providing them the software and the governance tools to unlock their own domestic wealth.
And the economic incentives for India to provide this toolkit are staggering. The text outlines massive, high-margin revenue streams that would flow directly back into the Indian economy.
The mechanics of exporting DPI are fascinating. We're talking about software as a service, right? Like SaaS.
It operates very much like a SaaS model, but at a nation-state level.
Wow.
You have subscription revenues for running these national ID and payment platforms. You have highly lucrative contracts for ISRO to provide the necessary satellite data and imaging to foreign governments.
Right, because not every country has their own space agency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You also have immense consulting and capacity building fees. It creates massive new addressable markets for Indian tech companies, agri-tech startups, and fintech firms to expand globally.
So it's highly profitable, but it's also a massive diplomatic play.
It is the ultimate exercise in soft power. Think about it. When a nation adopts India's core governance technology to run its identity systems, its financial flows, and its land registries, it builds incredibly deep structural institutional ties with New Delhi.
It wires their economies together.
It does.
You mentioned $50 trillion earlier. 50 trillion sounds like a consultant's whiteboard fantasy. What does that actually look like on the ground? What are the global stakes the author's projecting here?
The text cites estimates that comprehensive land formalization across the global south could unlock an estimated $50 trillion in previously dead capital.
$50 trillion of trapped wealth, just sitting there.
If developing nations can unlock that much domestic liquidity simply by clarifying who owns what and linking it to a digital financial system, it completely changes the global world order.
Because they become self-sufficient.
Exactly. They can fund their own physical infrastructure. They can fund their own education systems and climate adaptation projects. They don't have to rely on predatory foreign loans or massive strings-attached foreign aid packages. They unlock their own trapped potential.
It is an incredibly compelling vision, but I have to play devil's advocate again.
Please do.
Exporting an open-source payment API is one thing. Exporting land reform policies like wealth caps and redistribution seems incredibly delicate. How does a nation export a governance model without it feeling like digital colonialism to the receiving country?
It's a risk.
If India comes in and says, here is how you should map and tax your land, that's going to trigger intense sovereignty alarms.
That is the geopolitical tightrope India would have to walk. And the author definitely addresses these challenges. Success requires heavily customizing these solutions to fit local laws and distinct cultural traditions around land ownership.
Like communal or tribal land rights in certain African nations, right?
Exactly. You absolutely cannot just copy-paste the Indian legal code onto a nation in Latin America or Africa.
You have to provide the architecture, not the blueprint for the house itself.
That's perfectly said. The text emphasizes the need for strict data privacy standards to build trust and phased implementations that ensure local ownership and operation of the systems from day one.
Okay.
And most importantly, there must be intense, localized safeguards against elite capture during the land formalization process.
Right, because if you aren't careful, introducing high-tech mapping just gives the existing wealthy elites better, faster tools to legally secure their dominance and displace the poor even faster.
Yes, the tech is agnostic. It can be used to empower or to extract. So the key is that India provides the underlying toolkit, the satellite access, the cryptographic code, the API frameworks,
Right.
but they do not dictate the specific political outcome or the tax rates.
They let the countries figure that out for themselves.
Exactly. They allow developing nations to build their own inclusive growth models using world-class affordable digital tools.
It basically positions India as a premier 21st century governance technology provider, sharing a proven pathway out of poverty rather than a pathway into debt.
That's the dream outlined in the sources.
Let's bring this all together. We have covered an immense amount of ground today, unpacking a truly massive macroeconomic blueprint. We started by looking at the incredible proven success of India's first two digital legs. Aadhaar for biometric identity, and UPI for frictionless payments.
Which have already brought hundreds of millions of people into the formal digital economy and completely slashed transaction costs.
We then explored the critical missing third leg, comprehensive satellite-mapped land rights. We examined the mechanics of moving from subjective paper records to the Bhu-Aadhaar system, using ISRO satellites, low-flying drones, and blockchain ledgers to create unquestionable legal certainty.
As demonstrated by the transparency of Estonia and the amazing community-driven mapping of Rwanda.
From there, we tackled the staggering human crisis of landlessness, where nearly half of rural India owns nothing, trapping them in persistent poverty and forcing them into an unproductive, cash-heavy informal sector because they lack any form of collateral.
Which led us to the author's most provocative, politically explosive proposal: universal minimum land ownership, achieved through reclaiming public land and instituting hard wealth ceilings to redistribute surplus land.
Right. And we saw how combining this guaranteed minimum land with the digital stack creates that frictionless business in a box. It turns impoverished and visible citizens into funded micro-entrepreneurs through instant app-based credit, automated UPI bookkeeping that removes the compliance burden, and strategic 10-year tax holidays.
And finally, we zoomed out to see how this entire blueprint, this complete digital stool, could become India's greatest global export, A diplomatic and economic SAW strategy that could theoretically unlock $50 trillion of dead capital across the global south.
Offering a transparent, empowering alternative to debt-heavy infrastructure diplomacy. It is truly staggering when you step back and look at the sheer scale of what this author is proposing. They aren't just suggesting a slight upgrade to a government portal or a new banking regulation.
Not at all.
They are proposing a mechanism using cryptography, orbital satellites, and incredibly bold social policy to permanently eradicate the very concept of the informal economy. They are trying to draw every single person, every single transaction, and every single physical asset into the absolute light of a centralized digital system.
It is a total inescapable systemic transformation of how human beings interact with capital.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to ponder. We started this deep dive imagining a frayed, useless paperland title. The solution we've explored replaces that subjective paper with a perfect, immutable digital ledger. It solves the friction.
It definitely does.
But if a government can map, digitize, and assign a unique cryptographic identifier to every single square inch of Earth— wait, sorry, let me rephrase that without the pause. If a government can map, digitize, and assign a unique identifier to every single square inch of Earth and tie the ownership of that Earth directly to your biometric irises and your real-time financial ledger, what happens to the concept of being off the grid?
It ceases to exist entirely.
When our land, our money, and our very physical identity exist entirely on an interoperable national digital ledger, we unlock absolute economic frictionlessness. We unlock trillions in dead capital and potentially lift millions out of poverty. But do we trade away the last remnants of true anonymity?
It's a profound trade-off.
When every inch of the Earth and every transaction is logged by a satellite and an API, the informal economy dies, but so does the ability to disappear. It is something to think about the next time you tap your phone to pay.